what Stephen Furtick said is that I think is such an important lesson for our kids to see the whole picture of us. Is he said people often compare other people's highlight reels to their behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so if I can give Colin the behind the scenes look, I just know whether he stays in the business or ever want to or not, he's going to be prepared regardless of what he goes into.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Biz Dad podcast. I am excited to talk to James Bates today. He is a fellow Christian entrepreneur, father. I'm really looking forward to chatting with him, getting to know him a little bit more, and introducing all of you guys to James as well. So if you can, James, please tell us a little bit about who you are, tell us about your family, and then tell us about your business.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Adam. I love the concept. I love what you're doing.
Thanks so much.
Initial episodes have been fantastic. So, so I'm born and raised in a town called Modesto, California, which is Central Valley of California. So it's a little different than the rest of California in that it's very agricultural and rural, but then you're also very close to a lot of outdoors, a lot of the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. You got a little bit of everything within a couple hours. Grew up as a pastor's kid, and here in Modesto, and we can touch on any of these things later if you want. My dad is the 19th of 20 children. Amazing backstory with him. My parents still married, still live here in town. Actually, just moved out of the house that they were in for almost 40 years. Just last year. So still doing well. I'm a dad, and I love being a dad. I have one son. He's 14 years old. His name's Colin. And then my sweetheart, Jenilyn, who has just been such an amazing helpmate and partner to me the last 5 years, has two amazing, wonderful boys, Christian, who's 15, and Mateo, who's 8. And it's awesome being in their lives and watching these young men grow up and navigating through life is at all the various stages and ages. It's been really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and happened to own a business. I was blessed to. I had a great pre-high school and high school sports career in baseball. I'm an outdoor guy. Love being outdoors. Love sports. But because of our economics, we just didn't have much money. We didn't have encyclopedias or anything for me to do the AP classes and the book reports I needed. I told my parents, I'm like, man, if we had a computer, I saw they had at Circuit City an encyclopedia for $50. And a couple family friends heard about it, and my uncle, and they chipped in and gave my parents some money to get a computer. And the second time it broke, I thought, man, I can't wait for this thing to be fixed. So I took it apart, I fixed it, something clicked, and next thing I know, that was God had a whole different plan for me. I thought I would go the college route on some full ride scholarship offers for baseball, and next thing I knew, I was staying up all night. This is freshman year of high school, really the summer over 8th grade before high school, drilling holes in the floor. Had phone lines running everywhere underground, literally ate up every phone line available in the neighborhood. I had friends' parents getting mad because they couldn't get a second line because they're like, there's some guy down the street, he's eating up every phone line in the neighborhood. So that turned into actually being recruited at 17 to work for a 550 employee, $80 million a year company, and became their IT director at 17 years old.
Man.
They were going to lose a $20 million a year Walmart account if they didn't do this thing called an EDI, which I had no idea what that even stood for at the time or knew. And long story short, I interviewed at their CPA's office because they're like, we know we need you to build a network out, do this. We don't even know how to interview you. So there I am at 17 in my 88 Honda Accord stick shift at the top of some glass building in Walnut Creek with one of the larger CPA firms, meeting with their CEO and IT team. And Adam, I don't even remember what I said or how I got through it, but apparently I did okay. I got the job. So
Well, it helps
through
when they don't
that-
know what to ask you about, right? So
Yeah, that does help. It does help. And got the job, and through some various things. I think probably being not technology grounded. I'm not a gamer. I'm not into most things that a lot of tech people are, but I've always been into relationships and people, fascinated with business. And I fixed the Walmart problem in a couple weeks, and I went to my boss and I said, "Hey, Brian, I can make the network faster. I can make it store more. I don't know what we would do with it. Can I learn the business? Can I go sit with every department for a couple weeks, and then let's come up with a plan to implement technology to actually solve business problems?" 1 year later, we'd saved $250,000 in admin costs and overhead. And other businesses started asking if I could help them. And I started my own sole proprietorship, JB Networks, and first summer I made like $50,000 in 2 months. And I thought, oh man, okay, I got to do this. And I reached out to a good friend of mine since third grade and said, "Hey, IT, these guys are terrible. They don't show up on time. They're rude to people." This is back early 2000s, around 2002. And I said, "I think if you could show up on time, talk to someone like a normal human being, make eye contact, you could kill it in this business."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did. And we've been blessed. We made the Inc. 5000 list the first 6 years in a row in business. And it's been a fascinating ride. So I own a technology company called DataPath with my business partner, David. And we're all up and down California and up and down Ohio and parts of the East Coast. And we've been rapidly expanding. And we really focus on cybersecurity and networking for large organizations, enterprises, stuff like that. But the great thing I could say, Adam, to bring full circle, is I've had some great mentors in my life, and they've told me, "Hey, I've made a lot of money, and I would go back and trade it all to have the time back with my kids or have a relationship with my kids." And I took that to heart from day one. So my son has always been my priority. He's always been involved. And he has my time and attention first and foremost. And I'm so blessed. I have an amazing, fantastic relationship with him.
That's great to hear. Yeah, it doesn't always happen, especially, when you're starting that young and pushing that hard on building something, to at least have that thought process going, to be able to build that relationship and push that. So that's phenomenal that you've got that. I would imagine well, I don't know. Let's dig into it a little bit. Like you said, you grew up as a pastor's son. What was it like kind of growing up with your father doing what he was doing? I would imagine, he was rather busy. I mean, pastors especially, people don't really think about, oh yeah, well they work on Sundays, but no, there's a whole lot more that goes on the rest of the week and all the, everything that goes into being a pastor. So what was it like growing up with your dad, your family? Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah. So my dad was a pastor of a local church. So I have two older brothers who are 9 and 11 years older than I am, and they grew up as traditional pastors' kids. Church, dad being a pastor. And a year before I was born, my dad resigned from being a pastor. He was pastor of a real small church when he started, and he grew that to over 300. I say he, but God and just everybody in the church. But he was always a neighborhood guy. He would go out, meet people, meet them where they're at, say, "Hey, we got this facility in your neighborhood. How can we be a blessing to the community we're in?" But the church just kept saying, "Well, they got to be saved first before they can come in." And my dad's like, Jesus didn't really work like that.
Yeah.
So I guess to sum it up, when he resigned, he ended up writing a book, and the title kind of says it all. And the title is Legalism or Love. And so I grew up as an evangelist kid. So I wasn't like I had a home church. I've seen every kind of church, denomination, background that you can imagine. And it was actually a really cool experience. I loved it. One very pivotal moment in my life is, I'll never forget, I was 6 years old, and another minister was in town, and he was having dinner with my parents. And at the end, we all got up and said, "Hey, let's all just pray." And as he's praying, he put his hand on me. He said, I feel like James is being called, that he's going to be a pastor. And when he left, I was crying. I said, I don't want to be a pastor. Because you're right. I mean, my dad was fantastic. He would pitch tennis balls to me for hours in the front yard, spend time, but a pastor's life is never off. I mean, middle of the night, calls to the hospital, weddings, funerals, counseling. My dad taught me a lot about, and my mom. My mom's just an amazing helpmate to my dad. Like, they're just such an amazing couple. And he said, hey, James, sometimes people are going to come to the house and they're going to come in my office and I'm going to be talking with them, and it'll be for counseling. Just so you know, you never say that they came here, and I'm never going to tell you what we talked about. Mm-hmm. And it really has helped me as an adult in life about just not gossiping, having trust and confidentiality. But the pivotal moment for me was my dad, who's a beast of a man. I mean, his hand is 1.5 times bigger than mine. I mean, literally NFL players, his hand will engulf their hand. And he put his big old bare paw on my back as I was crying. He said, James, don't ever feel pressured to do something you're not supposed to do. And he said, being a pastor is a calling from God. And if that's what you're supposed to do, you'll know it. And that was so incredibly freeing for me to think, wow, I can just be present where I'm at and not feel pressured to be what other people think I need to be. Mm-hmm. So that was huge for me.
Yeah, I think that kind of that kind of advice can go a long ways, because I mean, I've had multiple people try to tell me the same thing, honestly. And it's one of those that if it's not God telling me to do it, then that's like, I'm not out here hunting for a prophetic word, right? Like, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, and keep asking God to tell me where I need to go. And as long as He hasn't told me to change my path, then I'm going to keep on going, assuming I'm in the right spot. So, and that is a bit freeing for sure, in knowing that and not feeling that pressure. I
love that. So, not out hunting for a prophetic word. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll try not to go too long down that path, but we can for sure later on if we want. But I would imagine. So you have 2 older brothers. You said 9 and 11 years older than you. So yeah. When your dad left and he started doing what he was doing, was there still a lot of travel involved with that? Was there a lot, like, how much did you get to see behind the scenes on what he was doing? I mean, if he wasn't pastoring an actual traditional church, what did that look like?
Yeah, that was cool. My dad was very involved. So I saw a ton of stuff, from recording and making tapes and traveling all over. I mean, he went to even Korea. He was speaking, preaching all over. So there were times that he was gone. Obviously, I was in school, sports heavily. But when he was home, he was present. I think the hardest part of being a pastor's kid was being in public. So if we went to a restaurant, my dad talked to everybody but us, because people, hey, Pastor Bates, Reverend Bates, this and that, and would you pray for me? And they would talk to him. So that, I'm really intentional when I'm out with my son, well known in the community and areas, and people come up, say, to keep it really brief, because I remember that experience, and it rubbed me the wrong way many times. To, like, man, I kind of want to just be at breakfast with my dad. Yeah.
So and there's a balance between, like, acknowledging who's coming up and talking to you, and then making sure that your children know, right? So I mean, I've tried to figure out, and balance is always a word that I hate using, but I've tried to figure out that balance, even when we're like, hey, we're going to take the week off, and it's always a quote unquote take the week off, right? Because when you're running a business, until everything is in its place and you're basically on a board, like, there's always things that need to be done when you're operating a business. But I'll get random phone calls while we're out at a theme park or something like that, and it's like, okay, well, let me take this phone call, let me fix this problem. And it's like, okay, well, I don't want them to always think that the phone comes first, but at the same point, it's the phone, it's answering those phone calls that help pay the bills and bring us to this theme park. So it's like, it's such a hard dilemma in my brain sometimes to figure out what is the right answer, what's the wrong answer. And I mean, I'm certainly not good at it yet. I'm still trying to figure all that out. But so as you have been applying that thought process, because you saw it when you were a kid and you're trying to adjust that now, how have you been on balancing that, quote unquote, to make sure that you're acknowledging the people enough to where you're continuing your business relationships, as well as making sure that you're respecting your children as they're sitting next to you?
Yeah, and I love what you said, because I have a tough time with the word balance. We can't be perfectly in balance as entrepreneurs, and those things, we stretch and we give a lot. I heard the analogy of a rubber band, right? So you have so much capacity, and there's times in your business is going to stretch that rubber band. And hopefully you have good mentors and feedback systems in your life that you don't break the rubber band. And so it's never like perfectly in balance, like sitting like a round rubber band. I'm going to stretch and I'm going to pull, but I also am cognizant of, hey, that has to retract at some point, and I need to stretch the rubber band this way. And so it's that constant flex. And that's what I do with my son. I mean, there are times he knows it's a busy season, or maybe it's a critical client opportunity or event going on, that I've just got to dedicate time and focus. However, what I've done to, air quote, balance more is, if that person comes up to me, is involve my son in the conversation, introduce him, and really teach him, hey, make good eye contact, ask them a question, when, beat the Greek, like say hi to them before they say hi to you. And in doing that, it changes the dynamic of the conversation to where they don't just feel like a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if I get a phone call, if it's in the car, a lot of times, I mean, he's been exposed to some amazing phone calls. I mean, he's heard all kinds of negotiations to dealing with employee, frustrations or issues, or client issues or opportunities. So that part's great. It's the post-mortem. I really break down conversations with him after and say, hey, you see how dad responded to that? What do you think about that? Would you have responded like that? Or what other questions? Or what did you think about that person? Did you see how they came in and their attitude was one way, and maybe they were really anxious? But instead of me feeding into that anxiety, we asked some calming questions. Yeah. So my son is more on the shyer end, although now he's been playing football and he's come way out of his shell. It's awesome. He's so pensive. He's thinking about everything. And what I've found is, I used to not give him enough time of the awkward silence to respond. So he and I going on walks, and it's just he and I, and we do it regularly. We go on walks. And it might be 10 minutes, it might be 15 minutes in the walk, and then boom, he just opens up. He's got all kinds of feedback, questions, conversations. So that's how I involve him and balance him. And I've been taking him to meetings and those kinds of things since he was 5-6 years old.
Oh, that's awesome.
And yeah, and you kids are sponges. So I remember picking him up from 3rd grade, and I said, hey son, I turned the solar on, it's opened up on the pool. The pool might be warm today to swim at the start of the season. He's 3rd grade. He goes, yeah, I got in it last week and I didn't even have to get acclimated. I looked at him and I go, he's sitting in a car seat. California, you got to be in a car seat until you're 32 years old. Yeah. But so I said, do you even know what acclimated means? And he goes, yeah, basically adjusted. And I was like, how did you study that at school? And he's like, no, you guys have talked about it in different meetings and stuff. So
yeah, they are. I mean,
it's cool.
It's so much fun to watch their brains work and see kind of what they come up with and how they think through things. And, there'll be things that I'll say. And then like my 4-year-old right now, some of the stuff that he says back to me, I was like, what in the world? Like, where did you hear that? And everybody we talk to, they're like, man, he's got such good vocabulary. But, to your point, like exposing them to all of those different things makes a huge difference. Like we have never talked to our kids like in the baby talk, or I don't talk to them like they're a 2-year-old. I talk to them like they're a 20-year-old. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm using, $5 words every other sentence, but
Sure.
they need to be able to just communicate with people, and that makes a huge difference, and it's fun to get those surprises when they say something and I'm like, wow, that is phenomenal to hear a 4-year-old or an 8-year-old say these things. It's really cool to work through. But
it is. And Gentleman's youngest son, Mateo, he's just so witty. He plays the piano. Haven't IQ tested him yet, but I mean, the kid, he's so witty, and the things that he picks up on and says all the time, it just cracks us up. But they understand a lot more than what we think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. If you can, you use the word that I actually had in like my notes when I was thinking about this podcast was exposure.
Mm-hmm.
That's something my dad, another thing he just absolutely nailed for me. So after that incident, I'll call it, with the pastor saying, hey, I think James is going to be a pastor, he joined this group called Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship. And we went to a meeting once a month. So here is my dad, so not a business guy, he's a pastor. And it was 300 businessmen getting together one Saturday a month, just sharing their testimony. So here it is, I'm getting like 6, 7 years old. I put on a little, suit jacket stuff, and I just sit in this business unit. But that exposure, that changed everything for me, because I sat there and I'm like, oh, this guy owns 17 Subway sandwich franchises.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's a general contractor. This guy owns a bunch of dry cleaners. This guy's a real estate developer. And they were all just normal humans. And it was a very transparent group. They were really cool. They talked about their flaws, their failures, their struggles, and their successes. So I can honestly say at 7 years old, I knew I wanted to be in business.
Yeah.
And ironically, the business that I'm in didn't even really exist as a business at that time. So I thought I was going to go to, I knew I was good at baseball, but I wasn't pro good. When you play at a high enough level, you see that 1 in 1,000 guy, and you're like, yeah, that dude's a stud. He's going to make it. A buddy of mine that had the same offers, he ended up going AAA with the Cubs and didn't make it past there. That's a grind. But I thought I was going to get the baseball scholarship, go to college for business, and it just happened to be there was a shortcut path in there.
Yeah. That's something I try to tell people all the time. Anyways, like college, if you can go to college for free, don't get me wrong, then do it up. But unless you're going to be a professional, lawyer, doctor, something that needs a college degree, I'm very hesitant on college nowadays. But it's not the success path it used to be. I don't think, but. That is not all where I wanted to go. There was something you said.
People.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I don't remember what you said something a minute ago that I was really wanting to dive down, and then you mentioned college, and my disdain for college popped up in my brain, and I lost track.
About the exposure and the different business people and the entrepreneurs.
Oh, yeah. So, honestly, I was not really exposed to much of anything. So what I was exposed to, both of my parents were Air Force. So I ended up joining the Air Force just because that's all I really knew. I had been talking about it for forever. I mean, I was literally 16 years old. I went and got my learner's permit, and then I went and signed up for the Air Force. It's like, I'm old enough now to sign up for the Air Force at 16, so I'm going to do it. And then I sat in the delayed enlistment program until I graduated high school and left. And I had no exposure to anything else. I didn't know anything else. And then once even when the job I signed up for in the military was the same that my dad did, and I didn't know it was the same. It was called a crew chief, as the general utilized term, but on paper it's called a tactical aircraft maintenance apprentice. So I went in and I read the job description. I said, this sounds great. I can do that. Then I go home and tell that to my dad, and he was like, that's what I did. I said, no, you were a crew chief. He's like, it's the same thing. And I was like, well, son of a gun. But I had that was almost all I had been exposed to. It was that, or, at that point he was a correction officer because he had already broke his back in the Air Force. But, so he was a correction officer, and I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. I want to go travel and see places. So I went and did exactly the same thing. But that's one thing that I'm trying to really do with my kids is expose them to so many different things, and I bring them to all sorts of different mastermind meetups, and they jump on the podcast, they listen to some of the calls that I'm in, they do all these things. I need to figure out a better system to really capitalize on that and have that postmortem like you talked about to really say, hey, what did you learn from this? What do you think about this? How did Daddy respond in this? What do you think about these things? Just to kind of get the engagement rolling, especially now that I'm doing homeschool. But I think that the exposure is second to none. My middle child was born in Japan. So the military gave us a lot of exposure to go to a bunch of different places, different cultures, different stuff. And now I'm trying to expose them to all sorts of different businesses and how things go. And like, even if they're like, Rourke, my middle boy, he was like, hey, I really want to be, I don't know, he saw some guy driving a tractor or something. And he was like, boy, I really want to do that when I grow up. He's 4. And I was like, well, that would be awesome. You know how much fun that would be to drive that tractor around? And how cool would it be to own 50 of those things? And then you could pick which one you want and have all these other people driving the tractors, and like just conversations that I would have never thought to have had when I was a kid. But yeah, I think the exposure is a requirement. Honestly, because I've said it 100 times on this podcast, and I'll continue to say it. But you are the 5 people you're around most, right? So if I can be one of the most influential of the 5 to really show them what the world has to offer for them and the impact they can make, then I'm doing my job. So
I love that. One thing that I do, especially the last few years, is been asked to be on a lot of different boards or come to a lot of charity events, those kinds of things. So any of those things that are after hours, like there was one, they're starting a new thing in town that's really cool for young adults, and it's called Digital Nest, and it's a really cool thing that they're doing. And I heard about it, I'm like, yeah, I'd love to know more about that and learn about it. And it was like on a Thursday night or something. I said, and they wanted me to come, and I said, yeah, I'll come as long as I can bring my son. Because I want him to see giving back. I want him to see opportunities to serve. I want to have him learn what's going on in the community. And I want to spend time with my son. And Adam, I've had zero pushback on that ever. People are like, yeah. And I mean, he's completely well composed. But it brings an excitement to the adults in the room. It's like, yeah, this is a younger generation that actually cares, and they're learning, they're being exposed to this. So that's my intentionality on that, and it's worked really well.
That's great. Yeah, I think that is. I'm bringing my family. We're putting on our. I don't know if it'll already happened by the time this podcast is out, but we're doing our 2nd annual conference with one of the company, Active Duty Passive Income, and I can't wait to do it. And I'm bringing the family out there. They're going to be able to see what Dad does, and I'm not going to be on stage much. I'm more of the background kind of guy, but see how all of the stuff goes, and see all the people changing lives, and watching and it just hearing all of this stuff about real estate. And then not to mention, since I'm homeschooling now, we're doing it in San Antonio, so I get to bring them to the Alamo and teach them about the Alamo and show them all the different things in history. And it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of do. But I think that I want them to see what it is like to give back, what it's like to earn the paycheck, what it's like to impact somebody's life, what it's like to travel. There's a one of the things that I was researching homeschool stuff a lot, and there was a book by a fellow GoBundance guy and his wife called The 5-Hour School Week, and they talked about all the different travel that they did and teaching on all that stuff. And it was like, this is exactly what I want to be able to do. I got to travel for the military, but it was most of the time me traveling. I didn't get to bring my family. I didn't get to one time my wife and I ended up going on a trip at the same time, and we got to bring my son. And thankfully it was to Hawaii, so that worked out pretty well. So we got to bring him to Hawaii. But
I'm sure there's less desirable destinations.
I didn't exactly drag him along to Africa or to Iraq or to all these other wonderful, lovely places I got to go. But yeah, Hawaii was definitely a good one to be able to bring him to. But now I want there's so much more intentionality behind it, and that's, to me, if you're being an intentional father with an intentional wife and partner next to you, I think that it makes a massive difference in a kid's life.
Yeah, I love it. The conversations and things that we have from those are just amazing. And let's be honest. I mean, part of GoBundance, those things that I'm very blessed or privileged, and I had an interesting conversation with my son. Actually, that thing I was talking about that I took him to, that charity nonprofit organization thing. I said, "Hey, Colin, you never he never asked for name brand anything. Like he wants to throw football, he wants to shoot hoops, he wants to go on a walk, ride bikes. I love it. And I said, you never asked for like this kind of shoe or this kind of whatever, because we were having problems just even finding the right clothes for him to wear to go to this thing. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, I know we do well. I never want anyone to think that I'm a spoiled brat or act like a spoiled brat. And that just meant so much to me to hear his heart in that I thought, I'm far from perfect and don't do a lot of things right, but that's the attitude that he has that I feel really blessed. I remember being at, it was an Inc. 500, 5,000 event, and Brene Brown was there, and she said she had a breakout session. And I mean, there are lots of really cool breakout sessions, and everyone was in this session, with the shame and vulnerability expert, right?
Yeah.
And she said, hey, we're here at Inc. Like, there's a lot of successful people in the room. How many here are worried about your kids being entitled? And, everyone that was a parent raised their hand.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm going to tell you something. She said, every one of your kids is privileged. And you can't change that. They're privileged in the fact that they're probably going to be exposed to different kinds of conversations. You might drive a nicer car. You've got businesses. There's just certain things they're going to have access to that everybody else doesn't have access to. The difference between being privileged and entitled is a heart of gratitude. And as she unpacked that, you just saw grown adults, just tears in their eyes, crying, just thinking about that spirit of gratitude. And, I can say Christian, Mateo, Colin, I love it. They all have such a spirit of gratitude. Like,
that's awesome.
You go buy them a taco at Taco Bell. It's like, hey, thank you for the taco. It's just, it's like, yeah, we got to feed you, but it's just nothing's expected. And it carries through with their peers and others. They're very grateful, coaches, people in school. So I try to really go back to roots of how much gratitude I have for my parents, how much they've overcome, how far we've come, the struggles we've gone through, and still made it through and overcome. So it's a self-fulfilling cycle when you live in a spirit like that. It doesn't mean every day is great, everything, but, in Dr. Benjamin Hardy's language, I love, gap in the gain. Really being in the gain about it.
Yeah, I absolutely love the gap in the gain. There was somebody, I don't remember who I was talking about how they were listening to that with their kids. And I was like, what a phenomenal idea to listen to that with your kids. Because, my oldest, he has a tendency to, he's a perfectionist, just like his mom and dad, which is dreadful as an 8-year-old. It's not terrible as a business operator, but it's dreadful as an 8-year-old because nothing is ever good enough. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, dude, you're 8. Let's figure this out. Who cares? But I know if somebody told me that, there's no way that I'd want to hear it, but understanding that gap in the gain and understanding that, like, how far you've come compared to, and for those who haven't listened to the book, highly recommend it. It's about where are you living? Are you living in the gap, like the distance between where you are right now and where you expect to be, where you want to be, or are you living in the gain, seeing how far you've come along compared to where you were? And understanding that, it doesn't mean that you're satisfied exactly where you're at. You want to keep striving to fill in that gap, but remember where you came from and be happy about the gains that you've made. And, sports is a perfect thing to look at for that with my 8-year-old. It's like, hey, you're not Tiger Woods yet, all right? You're 8, but you are really good at golf. And look how far you've come and how much better you are now and all the stuff. And it's very difficult I really want to, I'm saying all that to say, I really want to introduce my kids to that book. I think that's a phenomenal book.
Yeah, and 10X is easier than 2X is one of the best.
Another great one.
It's the best book I've ever read other than the Bible. We've started book clubs in a company. I've never bought so many copies of a book and given it to people, and they literally send me shared notes, conversations, follow-ups. It's one of the best mentoring tools that we've had in the company. It's been game-changing for us. So The Gap in the Gain and 10X, I couldn't endorse those 2 books anymore.
Pretty much anything that you could see Ben Hardy come out with it's going to be solid.
It's solid. for sure. If you want, I could share. So I find just being authentic, right? Being authentic with my kids. So like, if I do something wrong, I apologize to them.
No, for sure.
Say, hey, I was wrong. I'm just owning that. Saying, you know what? I got frustrated in traffic and I shouldn't have been honking at that person. And, it's not my fault or it's not their fault that I'm in a hurry. Right.
Yeah.
So there was an incident the other day. So the gap in the gain it talked about, and it really hit for me, right? It's, hey, what's up, buddy? Yeah, that's such a cool shirt, man.
There we go. He's telling me a story about the gap in the gain. It's a book. Whoop.
Yeah. How you doing, buddy?
Adam came along. Let's, for those who are just listening and not watching. Oh, come on. Fit this thing in your ear. There we go. All right.
Right on. It wouldn't be the Biz Dad podcast without our kids, right?
Exactly. I'm proving to everybody that I am a dad. It's not just the biz side, there is the dad side.
You're real, right? You're not AI?
You're not artificial, are you? Are you real? Let's see. Oh yeah, he's real. Yep.
There you go. AI hasn't
you were saying
advanced yet. So yeah, I was talking about gap in the gain, and in the book he talks about an example right in the beginning around. Let's say someone's making you run 10 minutes late. It's your wife, and you're going to go to a concert, and if you focus on being 10 minutes late, so he talks about it's measuring backwards. Not so you can have ideals. So here's where I am presently. Here's my ideal, but my starting point was actually way down here. So, and I was like, oh, that's where I get frustrated. Because in my mind, I'm not just 10 minutes late. I go to my ideal. My ideal says, now that we're 10 minutes late, I'm going to hit more traffic. I'm not going to get the parking space that I want. Oh, I'm going to be rushed. There's going to be longer lines at the food stand. I'm not going to get the food I want. I'm going to probably miss some of the opening band. And so all that person that's with you knows is they're 10 minutes late.
Yeah. In
your mind, you've built this crazy ideal that's unrealistic. And you're like responding as if all these things have happened. And so I thought, oh yeah, I've done that plenty of times. So I've had some really good conversations with my son. Like, you know what? Here's some areas where I was really in the gap. So case in point, it's like God tests you immediately. The next day after listening to this and talking to my son about it, I said, hey, let's go to this restaurant. They only do brunch once a month. It's a really cool brunch. It's going to be packed. Let's go. So I called Jenilyn and I said, hey, Colin and I are thinking about going to brunch. She said, oh, I have Mateo with me, and I was going to go to the grocery store and just make some breakfast. So I think Mateo and I will just join you. I said, perfect. You'll be a little bit ahead of us. We got to get our shoes on. Drive over. So we meet there, and Jenilyn says, oh, yeah, I saw Stephanie, my friend here that works at the bar area, the restaurant, and she's going to hook us up. It's really proud of it. We're going to get the next table before. Immediately, I went into my ideal. And I was like, I probably would tell the hostess, because the hostess is the one actually seating people. She's going to be busy. Hostess comes out, and just, Adam, a slew of people came in right after us. I mean, just a massive crowd. So, hostess says, hey, have you guys been helped? I looked at Jenilyn, and she looked at hostess and says, yeah, we've been helped. And she proceeds to seat the next group of people behind us with the last table of 4. And then when she comes back, she goes, now, what were you guys waiting on? I was like, we were waiting on the table for 4. So it took a literal 15 minutes, which seems like an eternity when you're just sitting.
Yeah. And your blood's already starting to boil a little bit because you're not meeting your ideal.
Yeah. So then we go to sit down. Jenilyn runs into a couple of her friends and this kid that they're being a host to. And I told Colin, I said, let's just go to the table. I don't really want to talk to anybody else right now. Like, I'm hungry. Let's go get some food. So we go to the buffet, and I kid you not, and it's like a higher end buffet, but somebody has dropped the tongs in the bacon grease, and it was like I stuck my hand inside a pork fat. I had bacon grease all over me, grabbing the tongs, and I looked down, and half of the food, you can tell, it's just run out. So now I'm instantly in the gap. Like, well, if we would have told the hostess, we would have been seated, and then we wouldn't be out of food, all this kind of stuff. Then there's a little tiny bit of short rib left. I grabbed the tongs who someone has dropped in the sauce, and they've been in there so long it literally burns my hand.
Lovely.
So at this point, I'm like over it. I'm like, I just want to leave. I'm over the whole situation. And Ben Hardy's voice kicked in my head and said, gap or the gain. And I looked down at my plate and I'm like, I got 3 things on my plate. I'm here with my family. I had nothing to eat a minute ago. I could just go sit with the family, eat these 3 things. Mm-hmm. So I looked at Colin, I said, hey, I'm just going to start with this and go back. And so we did. It ended up, we had an amazing breakfast. We had such a great time. When I went back, Gentleman had told her friend what had happened. She came up and said, hey, are you okay? I said, oh, don't even worry about it. And there was a lot of people back in line. They'd refilled all the buffet. Everything was fine. And she said, oh, I'm really sorry about all the stuff that happened. And I said, you know what? It was a little rough start. But I said, I just decided to be in the gain about it and reset. And Adam, out loud, she yelled, she goes, I love that. Like people got startled around. She goes, that's awesome. So ended up the night before, also I saw a Steve Harvey clip where he said, don't ask your kids just, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? Ask them what they dream about. And I was like, that's a cool question. So on a walk with Colin, I said, what do you dream about? And he has a ridiculous sports analytic mind. He knows every adults last year in the company were asking you, who are you playing in fantasy this week? Who are you sitting? Who are you standing? He's like, I know it says this, but this guy's got marital issues right now and he doesn't play as good in cold weather. Like, how can you retain all this information? And so I'm like, Colin, what do you want to do? Or not what you want to do. What do you dream about? Not what you think I want you to do or what anyone else's dream. And he looked at me, he said, Dad, I would love to work in the NFL. I was like, that's awesome. Yeah. Let's explore that. So that couple that Gentleman met, we end up going back. And I said, hey, Gentleman, can you introduce me? I had met the wife before, but not the husband. And started talking to him. This kid that they're hosting stands up from the table to shake my hand. Senior in high school. He's 4-star All-American football player. He's 6'8", 285 pounds. Jeez. And here it is. Colin just told me he wanted to be in the NFL, or work in the NFL, rather. And he starts talking to his kid. Colin's just eyes light up, and Colin's telling a story about how he met Bland when he got picked by the Cowboys. He happened to be in the restaurant he was in last year. So they were talking. Well, the dad says, yeah, he's from the Congo and we're hosting him, but I'm really connected in the NFL. And your dad said, you're really interested in being in the NFL. And he said, I can introduce you to, this kid's name's Mana. I can introduce you to Mana's agent. I said, and he named some players that are on the Vikings agent board. And he said, yeah, he's Derek Carr's agent. And so I was like, what an incredible conversation. He said, and I'm really well connected in football. If your son wants to meet people in back office, front office, I can connect. All that saying is, if I had been in the gap, I would have missed all of that. Yeah. My family would have been tense, waiting does he want to just leave? Instead, Gentleman, Mateo, and Colin and I, Christian wasn't there at that time, which would have been awesome. But we had such an amazing breakfast and opportunities, and I realized how many times have I missed out on something from being in the gap. Yeah, for sure. And until you actually think through that, right? So one thing I usually talk to people about on as far as their mentality goes is having a wireframe, right? You have a wireframe kind of built so for websites and stuff, you can have a wireframe and then you could change your pages from page to page based on your wireframe. We all have wireframes in our brain about how we see things in life and all this stuff until you figure out that your wireframe is broken and you're not going to get the feedback that you want with that terrible wireframe that you keep going back to. So you need to crumple up that old wireframe and build a new one. And that type of book, Gap in the Gain, is one of those that really can help you reset your brain a little bit and understanding how you're living in that constant need for something, right? And not realizing what you already have. And I need to go back and listen to it again because there's so many times that I was going to ask Adam while he was still sitting here, but he took off. But how many times that I hate being late. Hate being late.
But for me, it was like my dad always told me, like the Vince Lombardi rule, 15 minutes early type of thing. And then he joined the military, and the military is very, punctual,
Yeah.
and it's been so ingrained in my brain for so long that that's the standard. That's not the ideal. That's the standard. Ideal is to be early. Standard is you better not be late, right? So it's been like that's such a difficult thing for me to deal with. And like even if I'm going to my brother-in-law's house for a birthday party, it's like no, it starts at 2. We're going to get there at 1:58 because I want to make sure that I'm there on time and I've got what I need. And I get angry if I'm not. I'm like, what is wrong with me? I'm constantly living in that, and I completely forgot about that portion of the book talking about it in that way. But man, I need to go back and listen to it again. So highly recommend.
Yeah, because in reality, like I said, you still got 98% of the evening left, and you're with someone that you love. You got the car ride. You got 98% of the concert that you're going to see. Not all of it. So. Yeah, it's really, really powerful.
So I
guess the best way to put it is it set up a tripwire for me.
Yeah.
And so that tripwire is, I'm going in the gap on this. And so that short circuits it turning into stepping on a landmine.
Yeah, for sure.
Stepping on a landmine, usually I become the landmine.
Yeah, you're the one blowing up, right? Somebody stepped on you. But so I want to go back a little bit. You, if I recall correctly, so you're divorced from your first wife, right?
Yes.
Can you walk me through? Because I know there's the amount of divorces I've seen through the military time, and then obviously not even military stuff, right? Is insane. But I know that the kids tend to take a rather large hit on that from time to time, or pretty much every time. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit and kind of break that out. Like, if you're willing to go down that road, kind of how did it get to that point where that had to happen, and then how did it work with your son involved and working through the issues with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Liz is Colin's mom, and we're still friends, so we get along great, and I'm very blessed. We have a very amicable relationship, and she's a wonderful mother. We were high school sweethearts, met when we were 15. We got married really young when we were 20. So she was working nights at the hospital. I was commuting to Oakland. We were like passing ships in the night, and we didn't have Colin until we were both 29. So we're only like a month and a half apart in age. So the business was going, but I mean, it was a very busy time.
Mm-hmm.
And from my reflecting on it, and I could be wrong, this is my interpretation and reflection, but I realized something is, one, I was just workaholic, working like crazy. And however, we were getting invited to really cool events, and the mayor knows who you are, and this person knows who you, yada yada, right?
Mm-hmm.
Traveling and doing this. And Liz always wanted to be a nurse growing up. Like, she loved taking care of people. She loved that environment. And then when she got into it, she hated the environment. She's like, I love taking care of patients, but there's so many doctors sleeping with nurses and affairs and cattiness and nurses fighting each other and this and that. She just hated the politics of it. And what I realized is, I remember I took her on this trip, and we went to Italy, and we stayed at Villa d'Este, which at the time was in like the top 10, 20 hotels in the world. We had a suite there. I mean, it was incredible. Everything went perfect. I mean, we stayed top of everything. And I came back, and people were like, how was your trip? And this is pre-Facebook, right? So everybody wasn't posting everything. And I was like, oh, it was amazing. We had such an incredible time and this and that. And people asked Liz, like, hey, how was it? And she was like, it was good. And as a man, that was so defeating. I thought, if I can't make her happy, like doing this. But what I realized, Adam, is my career trajectory went like this. Like, I just took off. And I never took time. I couldn't understand why she wasn't happy for us, like what we were doing. But she really was trying to find her identity and purpose during that time. And I never spent any time exploring that with her. So unfortunately, we just started growing apart. It wasn't like giant, huge fights and blow-ups and stuff all the time or any of that. We just grew apart. So Colin was 2 when we got divorced. I was your typical overworking, busy entrepreneur dad. Mm-hmm. Every day I'd come home and Colin would love on me, play with me. We would play for a little bit, but food, diapers, caregiving, you bump your knee, mom takes care of all that stuff, not that. And so once we got divorced, and there he is, he's 2.5, and the first weekend I had him, we were 50-50 custody, and we've always been, hey, it doesn't matter if it's my day, your day, there's no such thing. It's what's best for Colin. It's one of our parents' birthday, or you got something going on. We've been super amicable about that stuff all the time. But I was like, dang, I got to change his diaper. He fell, I got to comfort him. But what it changed, everything. I just decided in that moment, I'm going to be the best freaking dad ever. Like, I can either say, I wish this, or so I guess without knowing the language at the time, I really was in the gain about it. Instead of, it's not ideal, right? But I'm going to take where I'm at. And like, I get all this dedicated one-on-one time with my son. And it turned it into where he saw me more as a nurturing figure as well, right? Because I was caring, providing, feeding. And it just gave us a tighter bond in relationship. And I still treated him as a dad would, right? So discipline, I've always been very consistent in discipline. I remember a trip, he's one of the most well-behaved kids ever, but we were driving to San Francisco Zoo, and I saw him take his seatbelt off over his head. I'm like, hey, don't do that. If I have to hit my brakes, it'd be bad. And I looked at him and I said, if you do that again, you're going to get a spanking. I said, okay. It was 5 minutes later, he's taking the seatbelt off again. I said, hey, when we get to the zoo, you're getting a spanking. And we live about an hour and 45 minutes to San Francisco, so it was a decent amount of. We had a great car ride the rest of the ride. Everything was great. We got out of the car, and I said, all right, we're ready to go to the zoo. And I said, first, you got to get the spanking for taking the belt off. And he cried and did whatever. But we had the spanking, and it sucked for me, right? I didn't want to start the experience like that. But I thought, you know what? I got to stay true to my word. And I'm doing this for his benefit. I don't want him to be harmed and think it's okay. So I've never been into I'm going to count to 3 or 17 or 70.
Don't do that.
Yeah. So there's been that consistency. And Liz is parented much the same way. So I'm blessed that we have aligned parenting and we talk. But a big warning, I would say, to people that are married, starting a business is you have to continue dating. I know it sounds cliche, but really explore what your significant other, wife or husband, depending on which side of the coin you're on, and say, what are you dreaming about? What do you want to do? And I didn't do that. And I really wish I had done that just for her own validation. Now, years later, she just bought a business a few years ago. She's an entrepreneur. She's doing all this stuff that I never would have thought she would have done originally.
Yeah, I think that's sage advice as far as for me, I always, like, it's on my one sheet, my weekly thing, and I'm not always very good at it, but having a date, at least one date with my wife, like sit down and have a meal with my wife, talk to her, like, but you're convicting me as you're saying it, as far as like making sure that we're aligned in the business side of the house too. And it's, I need to do a better job personally of talking to my wife about what is it that she actually wants out of this. Like, I mean, I at one point created this whole vision of what I thought our future was going to look like. Never talked to my wife about what she thought about my vision. It was just like, nope, this is what's going on with our family. I'm making it happen. And I scrapped everything. I said, no, I got to start all over. Like, there's no, like, I had zero, because I was at, I think, some multifamily conference or something, or like building out what we wanted, and like, imagining like what our life would look like. And I was by myself. She wasn't there. And I was like, all right, well, this is what our life is going to look like. Here you go. I hope you like it. And it was like, how selfish of a jerk can you be there, Adam? Like, it was difficult to look at. And I didn't look at it that way for a couple more years. It took me a couple years to really think through, like, wow, that's not at all your wife's goals. Like let's try to figure that out. So, if you were to go back to giving advice to folks who might be going through this, or they're building a company and they're not including their wife, how would you go about like having those conversations with your spouse if you can go back? I mean, as you're dating your girlfriend now, how would you have those conversations?
Yeah, so I could say, Jenlyn and I have an incredible, amazing relationship. We do date where we have a specific date night. We've been together 5 years. She's an incredible human being. She's had a lot of family, just horrible things. Her mom unexpectedly died of leukemia 10 days after being diagnosed. Was totally fine 2 weeks before. We were running around on the beach in Carmel. And then she's been a caregiver for her dad, who's has dementia, Alzheimer's, and drunk driving, the gift that keeps on giving. Unfortunately, when he was 17, a drunk driver hit the car that he was in and killed his mother. Jeez. And all these years later, a guy with 2 master's degrees, he's incredible, giving back to children, principals at some really rough neighborhood schools, just loves on kids. But that scar tissue area in the brain, because he had some lost stuff from his childhood, that's now developed into Alzheimer's dementia. So she lives next door to her dad, takes care of him. So, but both of us now being in our 40s and looking and being intentional, advice is, we've even go away and do vision boarding together. Mm-hmm. Right. And I try to set boundaries because she's really sweet. A lot of times, like, especially in the beginning, hey, tell me about your day. And I was like, honestly, like, deal with so many different things in the day. I really don't want to relive it. I'll tell you like, big highlights, things that I think might affect us, but I really want to be present with you, and I really would like to know about your day. And that intentionality of, finding out her passions and actually doing, like, she had a group of girlfriends over the other day, and they were doing a sound bath in the backyard. Like, that wouldn't be my typical evening night, right? But it was an amazing experience, and she loved it, and her friends loved it. So supporting each other in those kinds of things. I know another GoBro, his wife was not long-term health issue, but dealing with some health issues where she had to be bedridden for a while. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's just really hard. I don't know what to do. And it's like, I want her to read the books that I'm reading. And so our GoPod really talked and was like, hey, what could you do with your wife that she wants to do? And it was as silly as, because she was immobilized for a couple months, she had to heal. And it was like, they started painting rocks together. And it sounds so crazy, but it was something they could do instead of just zoning out, watching TV, but it was interactive. So I guess that would be the other piece, is do something interactive. Don't just put your brain on pause and constantly watching sitcoms, TV shows, but do things where you're engaged in laughter, physical activity. That, Jill and I are so intentional about that. And it opens up so much more just opportunities for conversation. So, I mean, we're all human. We have the same basic needs, right? We want to be heard. We want to be validated. We want to be respected. And great on you, like the self-realization of, it was your board. You didn't gather any input. Yeah. And you're like, we got to scrap this. So, and it's just being quick to apologize to each other. So that's things like, one thing that's helped me, Adam, tremendously, honestly, I don't know where this came from. It just came to me one day. It's like, Jenna and I had an argument, and we were going to sit down and talk about it. And the business side of me in negotiation, right? You're thinking about points and what are my responses and validation and all these things. And I started off and I just said, hey, gentlemen, we may not see eye to eye. Things obviously we didn't, and that's why we're having an argument about this. But I just want to let you know, I'm not going in this to win an argument. I love you, I respect you, and my goal is that we're happy and we're together. So no matter how far apart we are, just know that's the outcome I'm working towards. And it is so diffusing to the other side that you can have differences of opinion, but you are working toward a shared goal of mutual respect, validation, and being together.
Yeah, I think that the thought process of not going in to win an argument, that's difficult for, especially for entrepreneurs and people who are problem solvers. Men in general, as generally speaking, are very much problem solver type of people and trying to fix it and win and conquer whatever it is that's going on, and that's not exactly the best way to show love to your spouse. So wives don't exactly look at that with a lot of love and joy. Have you seen that video? It's not about the nail.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Love it.
it's hysterical because the guy's like, no, seriously, if we just pull the nail out, no problem at all. Like there's going to be, but it's not about the nail. Leave the nail. So if you haven't watched, anybody who's listening and haven't watched, It's Not About the Nail, look it up on YouTube. It's hysterical, but it's very much the mentality that we'd have, and he was also trying to win that argument. Like, no, this is really what the problem is, and really she just needed somebody to listen. Like, let's figure out how to get through this together and figure out what's going on. And that's something that I did pretty poorly, I think, at the beginning of my marriage, and I've been trying to work on that to get better at it. And the more I've worked on myself, reading these books and talking to people like you, and trying to expand my boundaries a little bit on what I'm mentally capable of doing, it's been nothing but extraordinary to kind of see how we can work that. Now, I've always been the type, and I to not let the sun set on my anger, right? I want to make sure that my wife and I have anything that needs to be worked out, we work it out before we go to bed. Because I don't, the next day comes up and then something happens and we can't talk, and then this happens and that happens. Life just keeps throwing things at you, and then before you know it, a different conversation comes up about who put the jelly back in the wrong spot in the fridge, and I'm angry about something that happened 3 weeks ago. And it's like, no, have the conversation now to get rid of it, instead of having it bubble up later on in 3 weeks about jelly of all things. But yeah, I think that having that mutual respect and having that conversation and saying those things out loud, and I was having a conversation with my neighbor recently about he was having some issues with one of the teachers at school, and he was asking me for some advice on how to approach the teacher. And it to me, it came right back to negotiation that what's the name? Never Split the Difference came to my mind, and I was like, anything that that this person is going to say about you, just call it out in the beginning. And I try to do the same thing with my wife. Yeah. Just here it is. I know that I'm screwing these things up. I know that I'm going to come across as a jerk, because that's and I'm really sorry. I'm not intending to be a jerk. Just call out any of the things that are going to be a problem. That's not to give yourself the freedom to be able to be a jerk, right? You still need to not be a jerk, but just I'm not intending to be a jerk in what I'm saying, and I have to do the same thing in business, because I have a tendency to not be emotional about much of anything. I'm very logical in everything. So if something pops up, it's like, no, this needs to be done. Done. And I don't necessarily think about the emotional response that somebody may have to that, because emotions don't really come up in my brain very much. It's very rare. But man, calling that out and having those conversations and making sure that communication style is there with you and your spouse, I think is super important. But I do want to go back a little bit again and talk about because this spoke a lot to me, and I'd like to kind of dig a little bit deeper. Is you mentioned that your trajectory was going strong in the business side of the house, and you hadn't had the conversations with it was Liz, right? I believe with Liz. So how did the conversations end up happening to get to the point where it was like, hey, we need to step aside? And was there a way, do you think, that if somebody's in that situation now, where they can prevent the divorce from happening before it gets there? How can that conversation happen before it gets to be too late? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I would self-reflectively say, go back to basic human needs, right? Being validated, being wanted, being heard. Those things are probably not happening if you're in that state. So what action items can you do to make the other party feel validated, and redefine winning? So if winning is winning an argument, that's the wrong definition. If the win is a happy, healthy marriage and our kids having our parents together, that's the ultimate win. And so in the 10X mind, that's the bigger goal, right? So 2x is thinking about that argument in front of me or the little nuances. And it's usually accumulation of things, and you build up this story. And again, you're wanting an ideal. An ideal is not reality. I mean, back to the story I told earlier. Why would I think I should be able to go to a busy restaurant, walk in, like a red carpet's going to roll out, all the food's going to be available, I'm going to instantly be, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So I think we don't communicate enough about and be vulnerable enough to say what's really on our heart and getting those things out and just saying, hey, you know what? Instead of me responding and being upset of like, well, I can't make her happy. I just took her on this amazing trip, and she was telling everybody it's okay. And like, we were two poor kids, rubbing two nickels together when we got married, and trying to make it work. And now we're able to do this, and she still does it. Instead of saying, hey, you may not have intended it this way, but this is how I'm feeling. Like, I don't feel validated as a man if I can't provide for you. And you may not understand. We live in our own bubbles and worlds. It's very rare that the other person is thinking, how could I piss James off? How can I make him feel validated as a man? Right? But instead, I respond with that exterior shell of protection of not wanting to open that zone up. And so then it just escalates to where it's easier to just walk away than have these difficult conversations. One thing that really helped is Jenna and I went really at Jenna's prompting, said, hey, blending families, different backgrounds, all these things coming together. I think it would be really good to see like a family therapist together, her and I. So I said, okay, I'll do a couple counseling appointments. And one thing that the counselor said that really, really helped me is she said, Jenna is a lot more emotional than you are, James. You're very logical, linear. You think several steps ahead. It's probably served you very well in business, etc. Just know, human psychology says when someone goes to an emotional state, the more logic you throw at them, the further you drive them away.
Yeah.
So the compromise was, I said, okay, I can understand that. That makes sense. And so she said, you've got to be willing to give the other partner space, because when they've tripped into that emotional state, that you need to have space. You're not going to have a productive, logical conversation. But also, gentlemen, you have to provide some boundaries to say, I need some space, but let's talk about this tonight or 2 hours from now. So it's not in James's head floating like, are we ever going to address this? Right? And so as we've been practicing and doing that, it's been instrumental, because as your brain starts to relax, I start redefining the win instead of winning the argument. It gives me space to do that. That's been, if you can find that, if you're in that tense situation, right? It's like, hey, let's give some space, but set the outcome of, I want this to work.
Yeah.
Right? Can I tell one cool story?
Nope. Stories aren't allowed. Sorry.
Stories aren't allowed?
Nope. All right. Well, I think we broke that rule earlier, so go ahead.
All right. I love, God really does turn beauty from ashes, and I love redemption stories, right? So here it is. I had gotten divorced and had gone through that. So several years later, there was a woman who worked in our office, and she had worked at another client before, and it was a very successful business, and the owner developed literally hookers and cocaine habit, and ran the whole business in the ground. It was a great company, and the whole thing went out of business. And I went to this lady in her office, and I was just thinking, I said, I wonder, it had been 5 years or so since that had happened. I said, I wonder how, and I named him, I said, I wonder how he's doing. And she goes, that asshole, he cost so many people jobs, I hope he's miserable. And I looked at her and I said, I hope he's doing really well. She goes, not me, he cost all these people jobs and stuff. And I said, no, I hope he's recovered and he's doing well. I said, can I tell you why? She goes, yeah. I said, when I was going through my divorce, people think of the glamorous side. Oh, you can go date all these people, you can go travel, you got split schedules, you got every other weekend free, you can go do all the stuff. And this woman in town who I knew well just kind of randomly reached out to me and said, hey, can I come by your office? I want to talk to you about something. And Adam, it was just God. I just knew. I'm like, I think she's wanting to get a divorce, and she's wanting to talk to me what it's like. So, and it wasn't like she was trying to hit on me or anything. Just that's where she was at. So she came to the office and she said, "Hey, I know you're getting divorced from Liz and all that, but I know you're getting to travel and get to do all this stuff, and that sounds really fun and blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of wanted to ask you what that process is like, and has it been exciting and all this stuff." And I looked at her and I said, it's the most chaotic time I've ever had in my life. It's really unsettled. Like, before you come home. So I said, if you had to do it over again, like, you should fight with everything you have for your marriage. Because I said, hard for me not to get emotional thinking about it, but it's like, hey, every day I would come home and my son would go, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and jump in my arms. I said, so if you want that to not happen anymore, that's what you're signing up for.
Yeah.
So it's not all glitz and glamour. Like, it's a lot of, I totally ripped the stability rug out from underneath me in doing that. The beautiful story is, she started crying. She said she was already talking to an attorney, getting ready to file everything. She canceled all of that. This is now 11 years later. She's happily married to the same guy. Their family's doing great and everything. So, as I was telling that story to the woman in her office, she was crying. And I said, that's why I hope he's doing well. Because there's consequences for stuff. Like, I don't get to walk home and see my son every day, or walk in and see my son greet me every day. But I have an amazing relationship with him out of it. But I still have consequences from it.
Yeah.
But now I'm able to actually help other people through my story that I wouldn't be able to if I didn't live that story. So I said, that's why I hope he's doing well, so he can help prevent somebody else from going off the edge or whatever. So that's my little side story I wanted to throw in.
Don't let the painful situation be a waste, right? I mean, we're all going to have painful situations, but if you can help somebody else get through a similar situation, and I think that I loved the way you said that, because, like, too many people go to the person they know is going to give them the answer that they want to hear. And that's staying in an echo chamber. And when you're in an echo chamber, you're not actually getting anything that's fruitful, right? You're just getting what you want to hear, and that's it. And if you're around a bunch of people that only give you what you want to hear, then why even talk to people? Why even go through it? You already have the answer in your brain. Why look for the advice? Why do it? So, I mean, if it's the same reason I tell people, like, don't go to the bar and complain with the person next to you about how bad your relationship is. Go to somebody who's doing well in their relationship, who's made it through some problems and knows how to work this, so that you can gain some insight that you don't have, right? And don't go, which this person that approached you broke this portion of the advice too, is don't go to the opposite sex either. Right? Yep. Don't go to the person who's been divorced 14 times if you're asking about marriage advice, and don't go to the person of the opposite sex to go ask about it either, because you're opening yourself up to way too many negatives, right? Thankfully, you were there to give wise counsel as opposed to poor counsel, or try to sneak in there and become an even bigger stone in the shoe as she's walking around trying to figure this out. But seek wise counsel is by far, and somebody who's been through there. One of the life groups my wife and I have been a part of with our church when we first got married was a young marrieds group, and it was ran by this couple. They'd been married for like 35 years, right? And they were like, "Hey, you're going to go through trials as a couple. You're going to have all these things and blah blah blah." And now, could you imagine if the person who was running the young marrieds group was divorced 14 times and had all these issues? And you're like, "Well, why is this person why should I be taking advice?" Right? So it goes again.
Yeah.
Find somebody who actually can provide you the advice that you need, that is experienced in this. Boggles my mind. I saw it all too often in the military side of the house. Is you get all these very bitter, very broken guys that get together because they're not going to admit that they're bitter and broken, but they are, because they've all been burned 15 times. and then they go to each other for advice, and it's like, well, all you're going to do is be bitter and broken together, and now you continue to break each other. So yeah, and that's another thing that I try to teach the kids too, is talking about these things, being open with these things, learning from the mistakes. Like, a failure is only a failure if you don't learn from it. But if you learn from it and you move forward, then I need you to fail forward and fail often, right? Like, just got to learn from these things from the right people.
Yep.
I don't know. I rambled an awful lot there, but I hope that made sense.
No, I totally agree. And yeah, I mean, the whole "you are who you hang around." And
yeah,
you were talking about looking for it. I remember reading a really good book called "Decisive" on just how poor of decision makers we are, especially entrepreneurs, to actually rated worse than teenagers for decision making. But they call it confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can see all these other things that say you shouldn't do that, and if you really want it, you'll find the one article or the one friend or whatever that says you should.
Yep. It's funny in law enforcement. You'd think like these detectives are the best at finding who's lying about whatever, and they have found that law enforcement officers are the worst at detecting who's lying versus who's telling the truth, because all they're around is a bunch of people who are lying to them and treating people poorly. So everybody is a liar. So if that's all you do is you're around all these people and that's just what you see and that's just what like the lens you're going to look at things through, then yeah, you're going to have that confirmation bias everywhere you go. And the next time that you see somebody and they lie to you, you're like, see, there's another one lying to me. So the next 15 people I come in contact with are going to be liars too. It baffles me. But it's what we do, which is why, when you're in a group like GoBundance, or when you're at your church and you have a life group or all these things, like, you be around these people who are going to make you better and make your family better, right? Make you think a little bit differently in a positive manner. It makes a massive difference in where you can bring yourself. So,
and that's I love GoBundance. Just
the
type of individuals. I mean, my very first event, I just happened to go to a restaurant. I didn't know anybody really I knew Daniel Del Real is a good friend of mine, and he had invited me, and we live in the same town. Daniel's like, yeah, I'm intentionally just ditching you. I want you to find your own way and everything. I was like, right on, man. But the first group I met was a bunch of guys, I was like, hey, mind if I join you? What are you guys meeting about? And they're like, oh, this is the dad micro tribe. And I was like, cool. And I remember telling gentlemen, like, what I loved about that conference was 70-80% of the conversation was how to be a better husband or partner or father, those kinds of things. I was like, I love this. It's like, we all know how to make money, we've done well, and we can pick up on those things and share really good tips really quickly. But it was the heart of you are who you're hanging around. And then the gentleman and I were very blessed to go to Ariel, to BVI with Brittany Turner, and her being exposed to some of the GoBros wives and that crowd, it just completely elevated her thinking. She was like, wow, I love my friends. I have great friends. This is like a different level of conversation. So that would be another piece of advice, I think, is like, when we're getting poured into so much, right? We have, as entrepreneurs, if you want to protect your relationship, you got to make sure that your spouse is getting poured into too. So if you have all these cool groups, resources, those kinds of things, that's what I love about GoBundance is there's a lot of stuff for the ladies, right? And so we get to have conversations around 10X and is easier than 2X and different micro tribes and what's going on, which I love. And that's transformed my business too. I can tell you, when I came back from BBI and then, hearing right before the book came out, Dr. Benjamin was giving a talk to us as GoBros on 10X and some of those things. And I thought, this is such incredible wisdom. And I went back to my company and I said, you know what? I'm able to go on these trips, be around these people, get exposed to all this material because of what I'm blessed that you guys are doing and the work that you guys do in the company. So I've seen too many people pour back and become philanthropic with everywhere outside of their organization. And I'm like, I'm going to become philanthropic inside of our organization. So I remember at the Tahoe event, someone asked, how many people have read Richest Man in Babylon? And I looked, there was 240 guys in the room. I think it was a champions group. 240 out of 240 people had their hands raised. And my boss gave me that book when I was 22. And I was like, all right, I'm going to give that to all my employees and I'm going to teach them. I want them to be holistically healthy and well. As I poured in that level of mentoring and spawned other mentoring groups, not only has we already kill it on customer service, but it's gone to even another level. We literally have clients that are like, yeah, we're throwing lunches and birthday party or pizza parties and stuff for your team just because we want to thank them for what a great job. The team's killing it. Sales are through the roof. And I'm like, you know what? If you become so wealthy, not to hear that you don't work here, you're going to tell other great people to come work here. Yeah. So that it all ties in. It's the whole person. So as you take care of the whole person, instead of just giving them business skills, sales skills, or whatever. But I think so many times on our relationships, we maybe work on some relationship things or whatever, but if we're getting some really cool tactical skills and stuff, expose it. Doesn't mean that they're going to always take it because they may not have the same interest, and that's totally okay. And your identity is not in that. So if they don't want to read the same book, that doesn't mean they don't like you or they don't like what you like. It's just they're different. We all have different gifts. But the intentionality, like Jenilyn sees that. It's like, I want to open up opportunities, and for the ones that are for her, that she takes advantage of, it's really, she's like, man, I really appreciate that because she's getting poured into, and it's not just me. It's like coming to a conference, you come back on a conference high. You're telling everybody how great it is. It's like they weren't there, right? But we do that in our relationships a lot.
Yeah, that happens with my wife all the time. And now I'm happy that, the next couple of conferences, she's coming along with me, not necessarily to be in there, but at least on a nightly basis, I can go home and be like, guess what happened today? And we could talk about it and engage with it instead of just coming back with like a whole notebook full of stuff and like all this excitement where she's like, dude, I've been like hanging out with the kids and doing work and doing all this stuff while you've been gone, like snowboarding. Like, don't tell me about all this stuff you're doing. At least now I can, she's coming along with the next few of them. So it's great. But, so I want to ask a little bit more about your business side of the house. You talked about your son joining on some calls and various different things. Do you have any desires to, or does he have any desires to actually join in on the actual business side of it, like to actually work in the company with you, or is there any desire or conversation about that?
Yeah, so it's always. I told him early on. Because he sees a lot of the difficulties too, right? So I expose him to a lot of that stuff. And it's a great business. So we love what we do with cybersecurity and especially working with schools and mission-based. And then we've been able to give back so much in the community and expose. We're big on exposure, bringing kids from schools into our office, showing, hey, there's great high-paying jobs right here in Silicon Valley or Irvine, various places we have offices. And so he sees that. But I told him from the beginning, I said, I didn't design this as a generational business. It's a thing. If God wants it to be generational, then it is. There's no pressure at all. I could sell it, and it's not my identity. I'm James Bates. I'm not Data Pat, right? So he's had that clear message. I don't see him particularly working in business. I mean, obviously, we're not in the NFL. But he's the life skills. Like, he interned this year. And I told him, hey, if you want to intern, you're going to have to create a resume. I'm going to give you the contact of who you need to give the resume to. You're going to have to do an interview. I won't be part of it. And you got to pass. And I'm going to tell the guys, you got to pass. And he's really good. I wasn't worried about it, but I'm like, and if you get it, whatever time they tell him and you commit to, you got to be there. I'm big on you're there early, you're prepared, you're all that stuff. And he killed it. He absolutely killed it. I mean, we had a school district, wasn't even part of our contract. They called us and said, hey, there's some mishaps and whatever. We got 8,000 Chromebooks that we got to give out. And 3,000 of them we have to give out on Monday. And it's Friday at 4 p.m. And these all have to be wiped out and redone by hand. It was a complicated issue, and there was no way to mass fix it. And they weren't even really asking us for help. It was just kind of like telling us their tales of woe. And a couple guys heard about it and said, hey, we're going to show up right now. Let's see what we can do. Yeah. So they asked, they said, hey, can Colin show up? I heard about it. I said, you know what, Colin? I used to do all this stuff too. I said, I'm going to go with you. I said, let's just help the school out. And we knocked out 3,000 Chromebooks over the next 8 hours on a Saturday morning. That kid
Wow.
never complained. We gave him the crappiest job of running like all the ones that were dead that had to be powered on. And I mean, thousands of Chromebooks, trying to find even the power plugs, plug them all in, all that stuff. The heart of what he had is he's seen the hard work, right?
Yeah.
And he never complained. And the feedback I got from the team is he kills it. Like, he never complains. He asks how he should be doing it. He's not afraid to be wrong, right? So, but he's learned those things through exposure. So he's not afraid of asking a question or saying, hey, did I do that right? And being corrected on it. So I don't think he would go in the business. I don't know, and I have no pressure about it either way. I just want him to use his unique gifts and abilities, but I do know the lessons he's learning in the business are going to serve him well, right? And I love bringing Christian and Mateo to the office and them being exposed, and they're exposed to a lot of the same conversations and hearing about that. I'm a big fan of Pastor Stephen Furtick in Elevation. I think he's one of the phenomenal pastor, one of the best speakers I've ever heard. I had heard this quote, and I didn't know it was him that said it till years later. I was listening to an old sermon. I'm like, oh, he's the one that said it. So Colin and I had just come from a meeting. We were with the mayor, city council, a lot of wealthy people stuff. And we were in the car and we were going up to one of our Airbnbs. And I literally had a toilet in the back of our car. After this meeting, like 2 hours after the meeting, I told Colin, I said, you see a side of Dad other people don't see. He goes, what do you mean? He was 11 at the time. I said, well, we were just at a fancy meeting, dressed all nice, all these prominent people. We got in our nice car. But what they don't see is the grubby clothes we're on, the toilet in the back of the car now, and we're going to go rental because I don't have anyone that could do this, and I just need to get it done. And what Stephen Furtick said is that I think is such an important lesson for our kids to see the whole picture of us, is he said, people often compare other people's highlight reels to their behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so if I can give Colin the behind the scenes look, I just know whether he stays in the business or ever want to or not, he's going to be prepared regardless of what he goes into.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Stephen Furtick, I like a lot of his older stuff. I'm a little questionable sometimes with some of the current stuff, but that's a different story. We can go down a whole different path on that. But that is super valuable, though. I think that, and that's the downfall about Facebook and Instagram and all that type of stuff, is that's what people put up there is their highlight reel, and like we're comparing our mediocre day, like just a normal day, with somebody else's, a most amazing day that they've had, which is why they're posting it on Facebook, or on Instagram, right? Like, don't like, that's their highlight reel. That's not their everyday life. You don't know what happens on the other side of that camera when something's not rolling, when there isn't a post getting sent out, and and like if it's me, like half the time I'm not even the one who posts it, right? So good luck. I mean, I'd be more likely to post the picture of that. Like last night, I took a picture of me hanging out with my daughter at 1 o'clock in the morning. She just decided that the last 2 nights she wasn't going to sleep at night. So I'm sitting there with a very sad, crying baby at 1 o'clock in the morning, with like, just, okay, what am I going to do? Like, this is life. This is what it is. Like, don't, but of course that's not what sells. That's not what everybody wants to see, and all the stuff that goes along with it. But walk me through we've talked a lot about it sounds like your son and your stepkids are in like an amazing position. They're doing really great. But I know that it's not always like that. So walk me through some of the more difficult times. Like what are some of the biggest struggles, and maybe some of the biggest, let's say, screw ups that you did as a dad that you had to go in and fix, and how did you go through and fix that?
Yeah. Biggest, especially like blending families, right? That's always difficult, and and realizing and appreciating other people's gifts and talents, kids, like in different backgrounds, right? So Christian's an amazing young man. He's not into sports and a lot of the same things that Colin are in, but the kid can go light up any room and just take it over. Like, he has such a gregarious personality. He's amazing. And he's found his way in acting, and he's working with acting coaches and like doing really well. So some of my screw ups, I would say, would be like initially being more distant from that, not knowing how to connect. And so just like not participating or really engaging in conversations because it's just, you don't even know where to start, right? It's like, where do I start in a conversation? So, and then for Colin, you know, it's, hey, if I've lost my temper driving or on a call or something, just say, hey, you know what? Dad didn't handle that right. And apologizing for those things. Another piece was I went back to Colin. This was actually last year. He was listening in on one of the GoBundance calls, and this guy was talking about just his dad had been such a high achiever, and like it was such big shoes to fill. And for us, it's just natural. Like to me, it's just I just wake up and that's just who I am. Like people say stuff that probably just doesn't make sense. It's like, I don't know how you do all you do. It's like, I just do. Like, it's just what you do. It doesn't seem that difficult. It's just, you just do it. But I looked at Colin and I said, do you feel like that sometimes? Do you feel like I don't recognize like the standards I'm setting and whatever? And he goes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He said, it's hard. He says, it's actually really intimidating, Dad. So I wish I had asked that question years earlier, right? Because how much more has he not opened up or could have shared? And so now I'm more intentional about, hey, am I doing anything intimidating or, you know, the standards? And I look back, I mean, I was a punk kid, man. I was on probation for assault and battery. I've been in so many fights in 8th grade, you know? And unfortunately, I turned it around in high school, and I did well. But I mean, I was a little hellion for a while. I mean, this kid. But meanwhile, it's like, hey, well, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you take that proactive step of asking the teacher if you could come in ahead or whatever? It's like, because he's 8.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Right? I wasn't doing that when I was 8. So I think trying to expect them to live to a standard of where it's taken me 44 years to get, and it's weird. I say, you know, it's weird being an adult and feeling like you're just figuring out how to be an adult.
Yeah. But
yet we're putting all these expectations, but we don't realize the wake that we make sometimes. To me, I'm just me. Like, I'm still the kid that didn't grow up with a lot, Carver Road, and I'm in the game a lot. I feel very blessed, but I'm just an authentic, transparent guy. But from the outside looking in, yeah, I have a lot of things and access to things and very blessed. And that's not normal for everybody. And the kids are seeing that, and they're hanging out with other kids where that's not normal, but they feel like they can easily feel like they're less than because they're not living up to these expectations. And they're hearing they're living a lot of the wins that you've accumulated, right? So that's probably my biggest screw up, is not being intentional and setting the bar too high.
Yeah.
And over especially this last year and a half, really relaxing that. And God, it's so much more freeing. It's freeing for him. It's freeing for me. And he's doing just fine.
Awesome. Yeah, that speaks a lot to me as you know, a very similar person doing a bunch of different things and trying to accomplish all this stuff. And you know, now that I'm doing homeschool and I'm like, hey, you need to do this, and this today. And he's like, what? I'm like, here's your checklist, buddy. Get at it. You know? And I'm like, you know what to do. Make it happen. And you know, he's already, you know, my oldest is already, you know, a perfectionist like mom and dad, you know, because Rick, and I are both the same way. So it's like, you know, if he doesn't get something done, you know, and one of the beauties about homeschool is it's super flexible. You know, if you don't get it done today, who cares? Like, we'll get it done tomorrow, right? Or, you know what? We could even do school on Saturday. We could do school at 6 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night. It doesn't matter. If there's something that you want to work on, if you have a reading assignment, you could do your reading assignment at, you know, before you go to bed. Who cares? You know, like this is easy stuff. I'm not, you know, but I still, you know, my standards are my standards, and it's tough to come off of stuff. And it's like, man, I really need to pay attention to that and make sure that I'm not, you know, because that very well may be where he gets his, you know, perfectionism from. Why he needs to, okay, well, like I feel really bad because I didn't get this done. Well, yeah, I'm probably the one who pressured him to make sure that he got it done, and now here I am holding the bag of having to console him for the fact that he didn't get it done. Like, way to go, Dad. Like, man, that speaks a lot to me. But I'm glad to hear that you only realized that a year and a half ago, and your son's doing well with it. So it gives me a little bit of hope that I haven't screwed him up too awfully bad since he's only 8, almost 9 years old. So man, oh man,
just fine.
Yeah, it's it's been said on this particular podcast multiple times. From one of the guys mentioned, it is so much easier to be a mediocre dad than it is to be a good dad. And I think having conversations like this and figuring out where we're screwing up and how we can be better and where our intentionality is and how we're putting the right people around our kids and how we're validating them the way they need to be validated and do it. Like, I think that it's the only way we're going to get better is to continue to talk about it and push it out there. I mean, there was and I think that goes on most fronts, not just being a dad, but as business owners and operators, as being a former military guy, it's the same thing. Like, if you've got stuff you need to talk about in your past, then, for anybody listening here that's, prior military, I've been through a thing or two in my day. Like, go and talk to somebody about it. Like, go and have a conversation, don't let it get to a point where, you're bottled up so daggone much that you're quite literally, killing yourself. And it's like, man, oh man, we need to have the conversations, make the improvements in our life, whether it's with your kids, with your wife, with your coworkers, with your employees, whatever it is. Like, have these conversations and be willing to grow. So I appreciate your vulnerability on that one. That one really spoke to me a lot as far as the standards for the son. But I love that
you provide this platform to do this. That's why when I heard about it from our mutual friend Adam, that I was like, oh, just the topic alone is so needed. It's so needed. I love it. So
I appreciate it. Thanks, sir. Yeah, it's and I do it very selfishly because I just want to steal everybody else's good ideas. So I do it in the form of a podcast because people will actually talk to me about this stuff. If I don't set it up as a podcast and people aren't going to talk to me about it, they're not going to sit here and talk to me for 2 hours. But if I say, hey, you want to be on my podcast? They're like, yeah, sure. I'll totally talk about this for 2 hours. So,
R&D, rip off and duplicate, right?
That's right. You're darn right. It's funny. I was literally talking to my son about that today. I don't remember how we got on the conversation, but I was like, because we were doing school stuff. And I said, what's great? It's when you're not doing schoolwork. Cheating is amazing. Like, cheating off of other people, like all of their successes, look at what their successes are and do what they did. History may not repeat, but it rhymes. Like, you can see what they did and make your own version of that. I mean, I'm not saying, again, like breaking any laws and, if they're, don't steal copyright stuff and all that. I mean, there's a difference here, but man, oh man, like when somebody says something that they're doing in the business that makes a lot of sense, like, oh, totally going to steal that. I'm totally going to steal that, and same thing here as parenting, like, I really want to be a better dad. So what better way than to talk to good dads who are doing what they can to make a difference? So
and we're all figuring it out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we all have, it's that we have screw ups, we have things, but the finding your podcast and being intentional about talking to other good dads.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly we learn from the mistakes, right? I mean, most of the stuff I've talked about that I'm doing well is because I made a mistake first and then got better from it. But if we can avoid those mistakes, or not, if my son's 14 and I've changed these things when he was more like 12 and a half, 13, you're like, hey, then my kid's not that screwed up at 8. Right? So
Yeah, and it's too many people don't want to talk about their mistakes either, and that's a shame because that's where we learn. And I mean, this is where true wisdom comes from, is learn. Like, if I can learn from somebody else's mistake as opposed to making myself have to go through the problem, then that's by far a better route to go. I would much rather learn through somebody else's mistake and gain that knowledge than to have the scars myself. So tell me anything. Are there any other topics that you definitely wanted to hit, that you want to discuss? Any questions you have for me? Anything on your side?
Yeah, I would just say the part that we probably haven't touched on enough is just faith, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And that for me is so critical in our family, and it's authentic. And I learned that from my dad. It's not a religion; it's a relationship, right?
Yeah.
So that we ask to be forgiven, but we also don't live under condemnation all the time, right? and we're blessed and we're thankful, and we don't just pray to ask for stuff. We pray to say thank you. And letting your kids and your family see you actually be your true authentic self in worship and thankfulness, and those things are so powerful. So we pray together every night, but it's not like a routine prayer, right? We pray for other people. We say thank you. We talk about sermons. We talk about messages. We talk about things in the Bible. But we don't walk around holier than thou either. We're human. And I think the thing that was modeled so well for me was my dad was actually the same person at home as he was ministering.
Yeah.
And especially in religion, and just the hyper hypocrisy kind of world and what it's judged on, the more we can just be real with our kids and authentic, and they see that like we're real, we're human, but we always return to the grace of God, that we don't just rely on the grace though as an excuse to keep on doing the same mistake and keep sinning. But that would be the one part I'd like to close on, is just say, that we wouldn't be where we're at without God, right, in our lives. And so I've seen God's hand so many times in all the situations, from Jenna and I, Christian, Mateo, blending families, who He's brought in our lives to help us, counsel us, and that consistency as a family of, it's not just, we go to church every once in a while and check some box. It's like, no, they see the faith lived out at home day in and day out.
Yeah, not being a CEO Christian, a Christmas and Easter only Christian, right? So it's, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's something that when people are like, oh well, Christians are just hypocrites. Oh, yes, like duh, like every one of us are. Like that's one of the reasons we go to church. That's one of the reasons we're there. It's because we are hypocrites, because we know that we're doing things that are against what we say we should be doing, and we know that we're sinners, and we need to follow a risen Savior to make sure that we are actually doing what we can to improve our life and get better, and try to work through these things, and work with each other to make sure that we're becoming better. And it's not it's not a place for perfect people. It's not a religion for perfect people. It's because we're not perfect that we need it, right? So if we were perfect, we wouldn't need religion. We wouldn't need church. We wouldn't need Jesus. So I think that,
when people talk to me about church, like I don't like this. I'm like, just so you know, like there is no perfect church as long as people are.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Until we get to heaven, there ain't no perfection happening in this church, right? So, I love having those conversations with folks too, and it's as long as people are open to actually communicating about it. But too many people want to. They're either on one side or the other. Oftentimes, and I shouldn't generalize too awfully much, but like. You're either a Christian who thinks that everybody's the worst thing in the world, or you're a non-Christian who's saying that there's no way that you could ever be a Christian because all those people are terrible people. And it's like, well, no and no, right? Like, if anything, we could say that the Christians are worse than the non-Christians, because we know the truth, and we know what's going on, and we still sin, and we still do bad things, and we still go down a road we shouldn't be going down. At least the person who's not a Christian, they don't, what's that?
Oh, it froze for just a half second.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that it as a Christian, you already know what you should be doing, and you don't do it. And the non-Christian, like they may not know yet, like they don't understand yet. That's not there yet, so they're just doing what they do. Like that's I can't expect a non-Christian to do things that a Christian should be doing. So saying like we're potentially even worse, like not necessarily by action, but by lack of action in some cases. So. But it's a huge.
If our families and kids see the growth, though, right? We don't just stay at the same baseline. We admit, we work on it. We're not perfect. We don't nail it the first time, second time, third time, but we continually grow. They see that.
Yeah, that's what I loved that you said about grace. That's not an excuse for us to go and make mistakes and go do stupid things, because we know that we can come back on Sunday and ask for forgiveness and all's well. Like that's not that's not quite how this works. Like, I don't,
Yeah.
I do not think that word means what you think it means, but no, it's a huge pivotal part in our family as well. And I don't, as with everything, I don't think I do a good enough job explaining it to my kids and making sure that they're involved as much as I should. And, recently we started a life group. It's actually meeting tonight, but, we started it at our house, and I'm looking forward to kind of showing the kids what it means to be vulnerable inside of a group inside the house, and teaching, helping teach alongside people and learn and grow. And to me, it's a massive important part of my life. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have the wife that I have. I wouldn't have the life that I have. I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am now if it wasn't for walking with God. So I appreciate you bringing that up and helping us end on that note. But all right, well, James, I thank you so very much for jumping on. It was a pleasure to chat with you. If people wanted to reach out to you for one reason or another, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
You can shoot me an email, james@mydatapath.com. And would love to, anyone that wants to reach out any way I can ever be a help or mentor or connect someone. I love seeing other people do well.
That's awesome.
I love having an abundance mindset. So if there's any way that I can be a help, I'd be more than happy to.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, James. I greatly appreciated our conversation. I look forward to this episode releasing. And please, anybody, if James, if you heard something today that he can help you out with, reach out to him. I look forward to this episode releasing and hearing everybody's feedback. Please let me know your thoughts in our comments. Like, subscribe, all of those things that you're supposed to do, and all those things I'm supposed to say and never do at the end of a podcast. But thank you so very much again, James, for coming on. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on, Adam.
Absolutely.
This is awesome.